Ah, there we are. We're now recording for posterity as long as hard drives exist. Future archivists in 300 years from now will be able to turn back and see all your smiling faces and say, "Oh, I've read about Anne Dublin, and now I can go and see her live in a meeting," or insert name here for all of you. It'll be good. So welcome. This is our final session of Unlocking the Archives. We're joined by our amazing archivists, and who I will say to the end, but I'll say it now. We're just so thankful for taking the time to research, edit, put the technology together for this lovely series. The series has been recorded the whole way through, and the recordings will be packaged together and put together in a post very soon. And many of you know that we're celebrating I believe it's our 100th year of being a Reformed congregation, and a couple other anniversaries as well. And so as part of our year of celebration of those transitions, we'll have these recordings to be with and to have and share. So without further ado, I believe leading us in this final session is Michael Cole.
Thank you, Rabbi Hoffman. I assume we get residuals from all of the recordings that are
Absolutely. Every time it's replayed, we'll give you 30% of the income. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. Anyway, thank you, Rabbi, for helping us, giving us the idea to do this, for sparking the interest in us to make this, to unlock the archives for the rest of the congregation. And originally we said, well, who's going to come? If we get half a dozen people, we'll be really lucky. But it seems to, with not a lot of publicity, have sparked some interest within the congregation. For that, we're very grateful. I want to begin. This is your chance to share your recollections and memories and so on of Holy Blossom and inquiries into Holy Blossom. But I want to begin by asking how many of you go back to your parents' generation. Your parents, you grew up at Holy Blossom, your parents were members of Holy Blossom. How many of you are in that situation? Anyone go back to another generation? Your grandparents were members of Holy Blossom. Any?
Yes. I think so.
Harry, do you want to say something about your family history of Holy Blossom?
Well, I'm not totally sure about when my grandparents were members, but my Aunt Shirley, my mother's sister, had confirmation here, and there's a picture of her with on that confirmation wall that I'm trying to get moved, Sheila, so it's more visible, so we old people don't have to walk downstairs, etc., etc. But my Aunt Shirley was confirmed at Holy Blossom Temple, so that's how I know that my grandparents must have been members. But in terms of my own family, my family joined my father and my mother and my sister and myself in I think it was 1943 or maybe 44. I was either 8 or 9. Now you know how old I am. And I went through religious school here, and I have been a member ever since. So I'm a long-standing member of Holy Blossom. I've had periods when I've been more participatory than at other times, and since COVID and since my latest bereavement, I have been a full-time participant in as many parts of Holy Blossom as I can, and I have to tell you, the connection that I have felt has never been greater.
Now, when you were growing up at Holy Blossom, who were the characters who most stood out in your mind and made the biggest impression on you?
Well, of course, Heinz. We were terrified of him, and but we loved him at the same time. He was strict, and he made us have decorum in the classroom. And I think there are two things that I'm thinking of. One I can add with a little bit of humor. I was married here in 1954 in the sanctuary. And my biggest concern at that time was that the bride's room was in the basement. And if you had to go to the bathroom, you had to traipse in your long gown all the way down there and find your way to the bathroom. And it was not fun. Thereafter, the bathroom outside of the sanctuary was for men, supposedly. And we weren't supposed to be using it. I tried to get them to make it unisex, but I got nowhere. So I'm an activist, and that was one of the things that I tried to do. But one of my most memorable recollections is my confirmation with Rabbi Feinberg. That class was so inspiring. And when we had confirmation, it was an absolutely wonderful ceremony and meant a great deal to me, because I was of the age where there had been no bat mitzvahs yet. And I didn't learn Hebrew, and I still don't know Hebrew, but that doesn't mean I don't know all the prayers, because I've memorized them all. But the confirmation class and the discussions we had and the leadership there, and when we were confirmed, the ceremony was absolutely so moving. I just loved it. I haven't been to a confirmation now since my kids were confirmed, and that's now many years ago.
Did your kids have the same reaction as you did?
I don't think they were quite as academic as I was, if you wanted to put it that way. I don't know whether, I'm not trying to suggest that I'm learned in any way, I'm not. But I relished the learning and the participation in that way. And my kids went after bat mitzvah and bar mitzvah, they sort of went to synagogue, went to class under duress. They didn't really want to do it. They were of an era, the 60s and the 70s, where this wasn't as important to them. It was to some kids, but not to mine.
Do you remember who your confirmation teachers were?
I think it was Debbie and Ellie Cass, I think.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure, but I don't remember particularly. I could look it up because I've got the records, I've got the program, I've got everything in the box. I meant to actually look at it this morning, but I had another problem I had to attend to.
Was Rabbi Feinberg active in the class?
Yes, he was, somewhat.
What do you remember about
But I loved it, and I loved the ceremony. It was so moving. I really felt that, I guess because we didn't have bat mitzvahs in those days, that was my coming of age at the temple. And afterwards, I did try to be a student teacher. I don't want to talk too long, there's only an hour. I tried to be a student teacher, and I don't remember her name, but the teacher that I was teaching under was not a very nice person. At least I didn't think she was very nice. And she made me feel like I didn't know how to teach. And I probably didn't. But I went through many years after that where I wouldn't even try to teach anything. I did not continue. And then I found out when I was grown up that I can teach. I'm not a teacher, but I found out I can teach and people can learn from me. So it restored some of my self-confidence. So I'll leave it for somebody else to say something.
Well, you also grew up in Holy Blossom. Your parents were members. Were your grandparents also members? Paul, Helen? You're going to have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I have one side story on that, but my grandparents joined in sometime in the 30s. I was browsing through some old bulletins and found a mention welcoming them as new members in the 1930s, although my grandfather did attend services at Holy Blossom in 1906. And we have a letter that he wrote to his then intended, i.e. my grandmother, describing his experiences. He had originally emigrated from Alsace-Lorraine to Dayton, Ohio, and then from Dayton, Ohio came up to Toronto. And he commented that the services were very similar to the services in Alsace. Just the language was different. So that was their story.
He was probably a member.
But didn't join until the 30s.
Do you know why they joined Holy Blossom?
Well, probably because my parents, by the 1930s, my parents would have been members. So it was probably rallying the troops around, to one synagogue.
Do you know why your grandparents didn't join earlier? If they,
You don't know.
I don't know. No, I don't. They had something of a peripatetic life. They moved around a bit. And I suspect by the 1930s, they were putting down roots.
okay. And so your parents joined and you grew up at Holy Blossom. What are your fondest early memories of Holy
Well,
Was confirmed there.
yeah, my mother was confirmed
So
there.
they've got to have joined before
Yeah.
the 30s.
Yeah, my parents. Oh, that's right. So
He's got it
that's a
wrong.
puzzle.
You've got
That's
it
a
wrong.
puzzle.
Your grandfather joined.
Yeah, my
Your-
mother
And
was
your mother was confirmed. there.
confirmed in 26. So they must have been members at that time. Okay, sorry. So I've got the story a little bit mixed up, or they may have dropped out from membership and then come back in the 30s. Anyway, where were we? What was your question, Michael?
Your earliest and fondest memories of Holy Blossom.
One fond memory. You all know, I'm sure, the story that Rabbi Feinberg, before he became a rabbi, had a career as a radio personality, being Anthony Fromm, the street singer. And
Actually, it was after he became a rabbi.
after he became a rabbi, okay. And his voice was, to me, absolutely memorable. And in the same way that we have the cello that plays Kol Nidre at the start of our services, Rabbi Feinberg would sing Kol Nidre. And there was something in the timbre of his voice that just reached me. And to this day, in memory, I can experience his voice singing Kol Nidre.
Yes, me too. It's one of my earliest and fondest memories. And the service began that way. There was no preliminary prayers or anything. Rabbi Feinberg came out onto the bima and sang Kol Nidre into the open ark.
Yeah.
And it was very dramatic. Of course, he had a flair for drama. And it was a very dramatic kind of presentation. And you're right, his voice was really quite marvelous.
You're asking for early memories. I have a memory. It's an anecdote, which I will tell. And that is, I was 9 years old, so that would be, about grade 4. And we had a teacher, and you were talking yesterday I heard your Heinz Warschauer program yesterday, and you were talking of all the wonderful teachers that Heinz got to teaching. Well, there was one that wasn't so wonderful. And I suspect the reason he was given grade 4 was more to do with an act of charity in his life than his ability to teach. And I'm afraid that I and my classmates were not the kind of students who were going to make it easy for him. He walked in one day, 1948, and announced great news. The state of Israel had just that day been declared. So we looked at him and announced great news. There should be a holiday in commemoration of this great event, and proceeded en masse to the front door of the building. And the poor gentleman had no way of controlling us or controlling the class. So we staged a walkout. Oh, well.
Were there any repercussions?
No.
No. Okay.
I think having made our point and got as far as the front door, we turned around and walked back to the classroom.
Boys in religious school in the 40s were pretty unruly. Decorum was not exactly of the highest level.
Yeah, I'll go along with that statement.
And Dublin, you've sort of done a history or are familiar with the Jewry. Where does in your research does Holy Blossom have a particular place among Toronto Jewry?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, I'm far from being an expert, but I came across some information about Holy Blossom when I was researching my latest book for young people. Apparently, in 1926, there was a Jewish farmer called Morris Sachs, S-A-X-E, and he began something called the Canadian Jewish Farm School near Georgetown, Ontario. And his plan was to bring over from Poland a group of Jewish orphans. So the scheme actually came to be in 1927, 38 Jewish orphans came to the farm school. The boys learned farming, the girls learned domestic skills. And there's a whole other story which you can read when the book comes out next year. Anyway, the connection with Holy Blossom is that the rabbi at the time initially supported the scheme. And so I was very interested to see what kind of support that was and how long it lasted. Unfortunately, it didn't last too long. As often happens, there was some conflict between different parts of the Jewish community. And so some people supported the farm school and other people didn't. And gradually, well, I guess pretty soon, Holy Blossom backed out of that kind of support. That was the main thing I found in my recent research, but it seems that Holy Blossom has to have its toe in a lot of different places in the Jewish community here and abroad. Does that answer your question, Michael?
Yes, it is, and thank you for that. Anyone else want to share early memories of their youth at Holy Blossom or growing up at Holy Blossom? Anyone here who was not a member of Holy Blossom, whose family was not a member of Holy Blossom, but they were a member of another synagogue and have impressions from the outside of Holy Blossom?
I'd like to tell a little story. Johnny Friedman. I recently became an associate member with my husband, and we've been very fond of all the activities that are going on, especially this series. It's wonderful. But I have a connection way back from the 50s when my father, Abe Bonin, was doing some moonlighting teaching in the religious school under Heinz Warschauer. He taught a few classes. He was an accountant, actually, but he was also trained as a teacher, and he taught a few classes at Holy Blossom. So that's the background. A few years ago, my husband and I attended a lecture at Holy Blossom by Rick Salutin. Now, if you remember, Rick Salutin is a kind of a bête noire in the Jewish community. At that time, he was writing all kinds of anti-Zionist screeds. It was, it made us all pretty uncomfortable. So after his lecture, he took questions, and someone stood up in the audience and said, "How dare you, a Jewish boy like you, raised in this shul, how dare you come out with these anti-Zionist polemics against the Jewish community and our values?" So Rick Salutin stands up and says, "Because of what my teacher, Abe Bonin, my father, taught me at the Holy Blossom Day School when he taught the prophetic readings how to speak truth to power." And I remember my father loved the prophets, so I'm sitting in the back and I almost fell over hearing my father's name mentioned by Rick Salutin as his inspiration for speaking truth to power. That's my little story.
Yes, well, it's very believable. Jack Kugelmass, you grew up in Montreal. Did you grow up with any awareness of Toronto and the Toronto Jewish community while you were in Montreal and the place of Holy Blossom in that community? You're going to have to unmute yourself.
Yes, Holy Blossom was a place, for Montrealers, Holy Blossom was a place that you shouldn't be caught dead in, because it was like going to Notre Dame or St. Joseph's Oratory. And by the way, the same thing applied to Temple Emmanuel in Montreal. So that's what I knew about Holy Blossom.
When you got here, what did you find?
What did I find?
It bore out its reputation, or was quite.
Well, I came with great trepidation, and I was shocked. Actually, the music was. I was very fond of Christian choral music, and at the time there were a couple of melodies that had a certain flavor to it that reminded me of it, and yet it was in Hebrew, and I loved it. I was shocked, and I didn't tell my family for many years. I told them I belonged to Pirkei Kodesh, and so they didn't know what the hell it was, and I didn't tell them. Some of them don't know even to this day.
What drew you to Holy Blossom, Jack? Besides
I lived across the street. I had a fight with another shul, number one. And number two, I lived across the street from Rabbi Plought. And I had met Rabbi Plought, and he said, why don't you drop by one day? So I did. But mainly I had a fight with another shul.
Susan Cohen, you grew up outside the Holy Blossom, but you surely, in the Toronto of your time and in your family, had an impression of it and what it was all about. And much later, like Jack, joined us. Tell us about it.
Well, I have to say that Holy Blossom always had a reputation for very exciting rabbis, and rabbis who really, I think, spoke for the Jewish community, sometimes perhaps not as the Jewish community wanted them to, but they were very powerful. And we called it the Church on the Hill. I remember that very distinctly. In fact, we did not go to synagogue, but I know that my father, who was a socialist, would never have set foot inside Holy Blossom because it was so radical, shall we say, so modernist.
And what drew you to actually join Holy Blossom?
The music, much like Jack. I came to a brotherhood breakfast, and the lecture was not inspiring, so I went upstairs to listen to a rehearsal of temple singers. And Benny was so inspiring, and the music was so beautiful that we just walked in, joined the alto section, and were members for a long time. So it was music which was both complicated, very musically challenging, but also that had such a warmth to it and such beauty to it. And Benny, more than anyone for me, was able to kind of really position the music in the context of Jewish values. It was a tremendous learning experience. Jack, you may remember some of the visitors we had, like Sam Adler and Saul, what's his name? Sorry. Some of the visitors were amazing composers. Sam Adler actually told us an amazing story. His father was a cantor during the Holocaust or just before, and he told us an amazing story about the Night of Broken Glass, Kristallnacht, when his father went in to rescue the Torahs from the German soldiers. And a German soldier came in and actually saw him as he was taking the Torahs out of the ark to rescue them from burning. This German soldier came in, stopped, looked at him, and then went out and allowed him to take the Torahs away. And they were saved by that action.
Anyone else? Les Rothschild.
So I've only been a member here for 12 years, or even less, but I was a member of Soldal congregation in Mississauga for 30 years. And the Soldal was founded in 1973, and Rabbi Plought was the only one from the city who actually took an interest in helping the new synagogue develop, and not only financially a little bit, but also leadership-wise. Most of the people who, the Mississauga Jewish community grew up with mostly people like myself who Jack stayed in the city, but a lot of us moved outside, and because of work, we ended up in Mississauga and parts west, and we're not familiar really with reform movement at all. Most of us were conservative or Orthodox, but Rabbi Plought was the one who really came forward and was, after we approached several other congregations, the conservative movement and so on, Rabbi Plought actually was the one who made it happen. And so that was great. And I know the same was true, I think, for Har Zion as well. Holy Blossom, was able to start other congregations in the area. So that's a legacy that Holy Blossom has, and I don't know if there are any other ones either, for that matter.
Temple Sinai. Temple Sinai.
Temple Sinai, then, yeah. So in that regard, Holy Blossom is a very important part of the reform movement in the Toronto area.
Now, you brought up Rabbi Plought, and we haven't really said a lot about Rabbi Plought in these sessions. We did a bit with regard to the social justice lecture that Amy gave. Is anyone have memories of Rabbi Plought that they would like to share? No? Bob Ruderman, you knew Rabbi Plought fairly well. Gonna have to unmute yourself.
Okay. We came from more of an Orthodox or conservative background, and it always thought of the Holy Blossom as the church on the hill. And then when I grew up and we were thinking about education for our children, and we heard about the school at Holy Blossom, we started to investigate, and at that time they had
Can you speak a little bit more into the mic?
what?
A little bit more directly into the mic. You're getting lost.
Oh, sorry. Anyway, we investigated. At that time they were having a Academy of Judaism, and Rabbi Plought was giving a course on what is Reform Judaism. Marlene and I took the course, and were completely impressed and sold on the whole thing, that if you took it seriously, it made a lot of sense. And so we joined. And I think actually, in that sense, Rabbi Plought actually changed our lives.
Anyone else? Sheila.
Well, I was just going to tell a little story about Rabbi Plought's mother. The very first volunteer activity that I volunteered for at Holy Blossom back in the early 1970s was the library committee. I was trained as a professional librarian, and there was an ad in the Temple Bulletin indicating they needed volunteers in the library. So I thought, okay, I was trying to find a way to feel more at home in the synagogue, meet people, you feel more comfortable. So I said, okay, I'll join the library committee. Well, because I did have professional librarian experience, it wasn't long before Vera Eisen, who was chair of the committee at that time, asked me to take over as chair. And I agreed to do that. And she then hosted a lovely lunch for me to get to meet the other members of the library committee. Now, again, like Harriet, I could tell you how old I was at that point, which would tell you how old I am now. But suffice it to say, I was younger than every other member of the library committee by decades. And one of the oldest member, the most distinguished member, perhaps, of the committee was Rabbi Plought's mother, Mutti. Yeah, and so during the course of the lunch, Vera, as I said, introduced me to all these members and then went on to say that Sheila had agreed to take over as chair of the committee, and I am sure that she will do a very good job. At which point, Rabbi Plought said, "We'll see." It was almost the end of my volunteer experience. I almost got up and left. If I hadn't been intimidated before, I was certainly intimidated after. However, I didn't. And actually, I'm pleased to say I became very good friends of Mutti through that experience. And not only with Mutti, but Rabbi Plought as well. I could honestly say I could count him as a friend, and I think he would say the same of me. He certainly became a very good friend of my husband, Bob, who visited him several times a week during the last 10, 15 years of his life when he was suffering from Alzheimer's. So that's what I remember of Rabbi Plought.
And Annie, you wanted to say something about your experience in the library as well.
Well, I did. Can everyone hear me all right? Yeah, all right, great. So I even prepared something because being a librarian, that's my nature. I found this series that you've presented absolutely fascinating and wonderful, but often the library hasn't been mentioned, and I just felt that I wanted to advocate a bit for it. So I came to Temple. I was hired as librarian in 1998. Actually, I remember Sheila was on the hiring committee. I had never walked into Holy Blossom before that. I'd been raised in a traditional home, but not a shul-going home. We went 3 times a year, basically. So there I was, walking into this imposing edifice, scared out of my wits. I managed to get the job. I was delighted. And I came to Temple as librarian from a teaching background. I'd been teaching English in a French school, French in an English school, and I was also teacher librarian in a French immersion school. Most of this was in Winnipeg. When I arrived, Michelle Lynn was director of education, and Bambi Cates was the principal of the religious school. And I felt immediately welcomed and, well, honored to have that position. It was almost a full-time paid position. And I'm saying paid because there's a big difference between being a professional librarian in that position and depending on volunteers. Okay, so what was the situation? When I arrived, there was an extensive collection of over 10,000 books for adults and children, fiction and nonfiction. There were also some very rare materials that in a way rightly belonged to the archives, but they were in the library. At that time, Toronto was really disbanding its Jewish public library. So a lot of people came to Temple Library, people who were looking for books on Jewish themes that they couldn't get anywhere else, not even in the public library. I don't want to take too much time, but I was responsible for a lot of different things. There was the cataloging, circulation, planning for programs, 3 or 4 every year. We sponsored courses. I helped the B'nai Mitzvah students work on their Devar Torah, and I love digging into the commentaries and reading, trying to get more meaning out of the Jewish texts. Excuse me. I also work closely with the teachers in preschool and the religious school to try to enrich and enhance their curriculum. And I have to say, I had a wonderful group of volunteers. Marlene is somewhere here. She was on the committee. The head of the library committee then was Ken Skolnick, and he was a wonderful support. And I also want to mention the late Lyle Stanway, because from the time I arrived in the library, he was there every week, processing books, schlepping books, doing anything that I asked him to do. And he was a real pearl of a man. During those 10 years that I was librarian, I was a member of the Association of Jewish Libraries. That's an international organization. I served on the executive of one of their divisions. I wrote book reviews for the AJL, and I attended annual conferences where I presented various programs. I was trying to tell people about the temple and tell people how important we are and were in the Toronto and broader Jewish community. So during the 10 years I was there at Temple, we also moved into the 21st century. We automated the library so that we could work on circulation, cataloging, and inventory in a more efficient and modern way. So I'll just end by telling you a little story. So one of my favorite times was when a rabbi would come into the library. So Rabbi Marmer liked to drop by, and he and I had a bond because he came from Sosnowiec in Poland, and that's where my father came from. So we always greeted each other as landsmen. So we'd talk a little bit, and he would browse, and he would always say, "So Anne, what do you have that's new?" And sometimes he'd even walk away with a book or two. Rabbi Moskowitz used to drop by too, and he would just browse and see what we had. He was very quiet. He would just come in, look around, and then walk out again. I was never sure if he was checking up on me or checking up on the books, but it was always delightful when a rabbi would drop by. So that's my story about the library. Fairly modern story compared to some of the others, but thanks for giving me the time to share.
Michael, and by the way, I think I have an overdue book from 10 years ago. I better bring it back.
Do you know how much the fines are now? You don't even want to think about that.
It's all right. So Michael, I haven't been able to attend all of the sessions, but I think you may have left out a rabbi in the history of the temple. Predated me. I think the last name was Davidson. Is that right? Is that
Rabbi
Davidson?
The first female rabbi?
The first female rabbi, Margaret Davidson?
Oh!
Is that right, Michael?
You just thought she was a rabbi.
I see everyone's laughing. Katie, is that your hand up?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just before we talk about the powerhouse that was this lovely Protestant woman who kind of pulled the strings here at Holy Blossom, I just wanted to hop in and say, although Zachary's from Texas and I'm from Ohio, our impression of Holy Blossom actually came from rabbinical school, where the Torah commentary is not called the commentary, it's just called the Plought. And so when I here and realized that the Plought was actually Rabbi Plought, and to hear about Mutti, it was really impressive to know that Holy Blossom had not only made this impression on us, but that his work is actually all through North America and the Reform movement. So it's incredible to be a part of such a vibrant history. And the other little thing I wanted to say to tie in Rick Salutin, and the Church on the Hill is in his book, Man of Little Faith, which is loosely based on Hines. He describes Holy Blossom as the pill on the hill. And a fun description as well. A little jarring to read when we first moved here, but certainly taken with a grain of salt.
Indeed. Well, at least Rick Salutin was my confirmation teacher. And he was terrific. He was, quite inspirational. This is before he sort of left for the States and his sort of second career. But he was an inspiring teacher.
Michael?
Yes.
So when you talk about a bit of the history and the perspective of the synagogue, of the temple, my late grandfather was a member of Holy Blossom before it became Reform, and he moved on to Gold Tzedek. And sort of many, many years ago, visiting with my father for a distant cousin, and I guess I had met her daughter at Holy Blossom. And when I told her the story, she said, your late grandfather would have turned in his grave. To hear that I was going to Holy Blossom Temple.
Well, I mean, this was not unusual for people to go from Holy Blossom to Gold Tzedek when they felt that we'd gone a little bit too far over the edge. But we also got some from Gold Tzedek, of course, who were dissatisfied with something there, like the dues or the rabbi or the usual kind of thing that people get unhappy with their synagogue. So they would just come to Holy Blossom. I think there was a fair number of intermarriages between Gold Tzedek and Holy Blossom.
Well, my late grandfather was an Orthodox man. I mean, he had, the family of 10 children ranged from ultra-Orthodox all the way down to next to nothing. So one thing, the 10 children and the 33 first cousins is a long, long range of where religion is in people's lives.
Was the next to nothing a communist? Is that what you were saying?
Well, I'm not quite sure they're there, but yeah.
So someone brought up the name of Margaret Davidson. Anyone want to talk about Margaret? Have any stories about Margaret? Paul?
No, I wanted to raise something else, Michael.
Okay.
You started by asking of our earliest memories of temple. Right. And really, I think my memories of temple would be remiss if I didn't mention, and I did mention earlier, a negative reaction to a teacher. Let me mention positive reactions, because there were 4 teachers that really had an influence. One was Basia Hunter. Mm-hmm. They got the kids going in theater. I can well remember rehearsing for and appearing in Basia Hunter productions in the religious school. Another would be Ben Steinberg, whose contribution to the religious school, the music program, was amazing. And above and beyond all, when I hit grades 9 and 10, my confirmation teacher and pre-confirmation, then Schlesinger, confirmation, Emil Fackenheim, they reached me. The 4 of them really are among my fondest memories of Holy Blossom. I had to get that in there.
Were you in the religious school choir?
No.
No. Okay. Anyone here in the religious school choir? I was. And at the time, the choir was about over 100 kids. I mean,
wow.
And we sang in English, in Hebrew, and in Yiddish. Because, of course, Ben knew all of those languages. He came from a cantorial family. Yes, and do you remember his accordion?
Yeah.
What was its name?
Oscar.
Oscar.
Okay.
Oscar, yes. Okay. Any other, anyone else want to say something? I saw a hand somewhere. Harriet.
Yes. I'd like to go back again to the Ploughts. My mother-in-law, I think she was the first trustee, a woman trustee of Holy Blossom, Lillian Wallman. And she was very prominent and active in the temple. By the late 60s, she was beginning to suffer from a little bit of dementia, which got far worse. She reached the end of her days, but she was always at home. And Rabbi Plought, who was her friend, religiously visited her throughout her entire illness and remained her dear friend. And I don't know whether Mutti, and I saw her many, many times and met her. And I know at times she could be sort of tough on the outside, but she was a wonderful friend to my mother-in-law. And I don't think she's had enough credit for her ability to relate to other people. And I just wanted to mention that because she deserves recognition for that. The other point I wanted to make was I had occasion, I knew Rabbi Plought, of course, very well because he was my rabbi. But in 1981, I was working for a minister of immigration, and Rabbi Plought had finished his paper on refugee status. And I was responsible to help develop a policy that has formed the basis of our present refugee determination system, which I worked in for many years, sometime later. And I had occasion to be in touch with Rabbi Plought about this and ask him, his opinion and ask him to express his views and everything. So he was, despite his prominence as our rabbi, he remained active in promoting something like that, which was dear to his heart, of course, having escaped Germany. So it was an honor to work with him, and he provided me with a lot of insight that I ultimately used in my recommendations.
I take it that, thank you, Harriet. I take it that no one here knew Rabbi Eisendrath or has memories of Rabbi Eisendrath.
I did.
Okay. I actually met him once and saw him from the pulpit a couple of times when he came back to Holy Blossom. But Howard and I, of course, have been working on his manuscripts and so we sort of feel like we know him, almost intimately, having read so much of his sermons. Howard, you wanted to say something that you didn't get to say in your presentation. You're gonna have to unmute yourself, Howard.
Okay, yeah, no, I did get cut off a little bit at the end. Where do I start? I guess I should say that I was talking at the time about Rabbi Eisendrath and the Ku Klux Klan and the efforts of the Klan to prevent the marriage, an interracial marriage between Ira Johnson and Isabel Jones. I should say they were married. They were actually married the day before Rabbi Eisendrath delivered that sermon. We don't know whether he was aware of it at the time, but it isn't reflected in the manuscript. He may have just extemporaneously referred to it when he actually got up to deliver the sermon. On the following Monday, there was a composite photograph published in the Toronto Star, which mentioned the marriage, and it showed the married couple in separate photographs, and also 2 or 3 other people, the minister who married them, another black minister who was quite outspoken about the events, and Rabbi Eisendrath. And I found that very telling, that he was associated with their travails and with that campaign. No other religious personalities were in that photograph, or as far as I can remember in the article. The article is available on microfiche or microfilm reels in the basement of the Toronto Reference Library. And I meant to go back there and try to reread it, but I haven't been able to get back because the library is closed. Rabbi Eisendrath remained very involved in matters of racial justice. And we have a tape recording of an interview which Rabbi Ave Schulman did with Rita Eisendrath many years later after Rabbi Eisendrath passed on. And she talks about the friendship between Rabbi Eisendrath and Martin Luther King. There was an occasion Well, I can actually play that clip if I can be made co-host, I think, somehow. Is that possible?
You are.
I am a co-host. Okay, well, let me see if I can do this then. Just give me a second here. And I will make that, well, let me just here. I got to minimize this. And go here. And am I screen sharing now?
No. Weren't you in Zoom class in high school, Howard?
You know, maybe rather than, I would probably take up too much of people's time trying to get this queued up right now on the fly. But let me just say that there was an occasion when Rabbi Eisendrath and Martin Luther King were both at the same hotel at different events. And Rita Eisendrath describes how Martin Luther King saw Eisendrath's name on an announcement in the foyer of the hotel and came to find Rabbi Eisendrath. And she was struck by how warmly the two men embraced. They really hugged each other, which is not a common thing to see men do when they greet each other. But she says it was an incredibly warm friendship and really made an impression on her. So,
maybe we can put that excerpt up on the website, or otherwise make it available. I see in the few minutes we have left, Judith Gert is with us. And Judith, I know you don't go back to the founding of Holy Blossom, but you go back to one of the founding families of Holy Blossom, the Samuels. Louis Samuel, of course, was one of the 18 gentlemen who gathered together on that first autumn day in 1856 to form a synagogue, which was formed weeks later, yet unnamed. They said, well, the name, we'll decide on a name later. Of course, they never did, but they said they would. But Louis Samuel, of course, was one of them, and you are related to the Samuel family or somehow connected to them. Do you want to unmute yourself, Judith? You want to unmute yourself and then tell us a little bit about them?
Am I on now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh. Yes, the Samuel family were related to my daughter-in-law. Her name is Sarah Rosenfeld, and her father's sister married Ted Samuel. You must remember the late Ted and Margot Samuel. And I've done a lot of research on the family. I've been able to go back to the early 1800s. They came from England, and some of the family migrated to United States and Canada, and there was other members went to Australia and New Zealand. And there's quite a, in fact, I have all the genealogical records for them as well. So it's been a very exciting project.
Tell us something about Sigmund Samuel, who was a...
Yes, yeah. He was a cousin to I blanked out for a minute.
Okay.
To Louis Samuel.
Well, he was Louis Samuel's son.
Cousin.
No, Sigmund Samuel was the son of Louis Samuel.
I have to go back to my records.
The rose window at the back of our sanctuary was the first window put in the building, the first
right
glass window put in our building. Sheila says no. Do you want to correct me, Sheila?
The very first window to go in the sanctuary is the one in the Herman Chapel closest to the Beamer. It's the women's one. I mean, I think that's just so fascinating. It predates by a year or so, the rose window. Sorry, Michael.
I wasn't considering that as the sanctuary, I guess. But
okay.
The rose window was dedicated by, given by Sigmund Samuel in memory of his parents, Louis and Kate.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my records, I recently moved and a lot of my records are off site right now. But I did locate Louis Samuel's will from the Archives of Ontario. And I have that. So at some point when the virus is over, perhaps we could, I could share some of the information with you.
Do you know who he left his money to, other than his immediate family?
Pardon?
You remember who he left his money to, other than his immediate family? Did any of it come to Holy Blossom?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I was, as a matter of fact, I was surprised that he made a lot of donations during his lifetime, but I didn't find anything in the will. It was mainly to family members.
Okay. Sigmund Samuel did, as I say, he gave us the rose window. I believe he's also responsible for the air conditioning at Holy Blossom. He used to put in an air conditioner.
Well, that's important.
About in 1960s, or maybe I think he had passed early then, but in maybe the late 1950s, not that long ago. Because I remember my bar mitzvah in 1958, there was no air conditioning, and it was in June, and it was boiling. So we were very happy to get that gift. He also gave our Chanukiah, the silver Chanukiah, and if you look on it, it says this Hanukkah menorah was donated by me, Sigmund Samuel, in such and such a year. So he wanted to be sure that we knew where it came from.
But Michael, he also was he gave to the University of Toronto, right? The library. It's Jack.
Huge homage to the University of Toronto. Yeah, that was his major, the major beneficiary of his largesse was not Holy Blossom, but was the University of Toronto.
But was the University of Toronto not very friendly to Jews at the time, but they took his money? Is that what the story was?
Well, I think it was pretty, lots of Jews went to U of T in those years. Okay. I don't think he was a graduate of U of T, but maybe his children were. I don't know. We'll leave that for Judith to research.
So, Michael, before we go, can I mention a couple of things?
Yes, please.
One is, I don't know if everybody's looking at the chat window because it's not always open on everybody's screen, but there's a marvelous comment that's been typed there, which I hope everybody will read from Nada Simon Hara. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but please read that because it's about an interesting, just read it. It speaks for itself. And the other thing I'd like to say is if anybody online here has got useful artifacts that might be donated to the archives, we would love to have them. In some cases, maybe you don't want to give us the physical item, but we might take a scan or a photograph of it. We are formulating an acquisition policy. Not every personal memento is acceptable for our collection, but some things we absolutely would love to have. So please reach out to us. And the other thing, Paul, one time you brought one of the photo club meetings, Brotherhood Photo Club meetings, which is a club you chaired so well for so many years. That letter which your grandfather actually wrote about his first experience at Holy Blossom. And I remember, I don't want to tell your story, but I remember that he was a piano salesman on the weekends. But one weekend, I think the weather was bad, or for some reason, he didn't go out trying to sell pianos. And he accepted an invitation to Holy Blossom. And then afterwards, he was asked back to the rabbi's home for, I think they shared some
the rabbi
or something.
The rabbi served me curacao, bracket, real curacao, close
right.
bracket. So one wonders what the other type of curacao was, but it certainly made an impression.
And what struck me from that story was one, how just a random event that it rained that day and he couldn't go out or whatever, plus also the power of just the rabbi personally reaching out and extending an invitation, showing some hospitality, and years later, your life is affected by that sort of kind, hospitable gesture.
Yes, quite so.
So,
Michael, yeah, Michael, I've got to hop off to another meeting, but I just wanted to say that this has been fabulous. And I think I'm the only board member. Well, Rabbi, you're a board member as well. But I'm certainly on behalf of the board, I want to thank all of the committee for doing such a fabulous job. And it's interesting because I came on because I really know nothing about the history. As I said, I'm a relatively new member. And most of the people who came on here are older members. I understand that. You want to hear about what you lived through. But I think if there's some way with it, we can put this together somehow to have not only the board, but members who have come more recently and make it, maybe not make it so, long, maybe not make it the 6 or 7 hours, but it would be really instrumental, especially, Rabbi, as you said, because we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of our reform of becoming a reform. So that may be I would suggest a project, because it's really, I haven't been every one. I'm going to go back and listen to the ones I've missed, but it's been fascinating, really fascinating. And I really want to thank you so much on behalf of the leadership of the congregation.
No, thank you. And it's, I think all of us would say that it's been fun. We had a great time preparing these. It was a labor of love for us to.
I can tell. No, really, you can tell.
It was fabulous, absolutely fabulous. The archive committee should get an Academy Award for whatever they've done. It's just been great.
Thank you.
What a group of volunteers.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming. As I say, when we started, we didn't know if anyone would come. We thought we'd be talking to each other, which we do from time to time.
And for me as a newbie, it was fantastic to hear all your stories, but I don't really have any stories. I'm too new.
Oh, well, some of the news stories are some of the best.
I'll tell you my first memory.
Right, I've got to go.
My first Yom Kippur Kol Nidre, I came dressed in what I thought was such a lovely outfit. It was a winter white from South Africa, and I thought I was very smart. And when I walked into the shul, there was a sea of black, and I was the only person wearing white. I felt so embarrassed. That's my first memory.
So we know if we go to South Africa for high holidays, we should.
The rabbi was wearing white at camp. Right?
Yes.
For wearing a kittel, you were properly dressed.
Right, and there are synagogues we could send you to where they wear black all the time.
Now, Michael, will the Archives Committee promise to do this again in 100 years from now?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're going to put out the publicity starting now. Okay. Thank you all, and thank you, Rabbi Helfman, for inviting us to do this. And we are.
Can we give out our email address again, please?
I'm sorry?
Let's give out our email address so that if people want to follow up with us. It's archives@holyblossom.org.
I thought Katie did a great job too.
Thanks.
Yes, Katie has been a godsend, literally.
I'm a little distracted these days. As everyone is looking to the high holidays, we are looking forward to meeting our son. So I feel really grateful for Michael and Sheila and Susan and Emily and Howard and Jordan or Rabbi Helfman being so patient and kind with all of this, because it has really given me something that I'm proud of. And now I can put this down and pick up this baby and then and feel
not that
like
easy. I don't know if anyone's told you, it's not you just can't just pick up the baby, right? There's little
just pick it up. No, it's fine. But I'm so glad y'all enjoyed it, and I hope that we get to teach again in a few months, and hopefully we'll all be together again at some point in Temple. And I look forward to seeing all of your faces in real life and shaking hands, or at least politely bowing, because I'm sure you miss it as much as I do.
You've been an excellent migrant worker, by the way.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, everyone. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
the best.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.